Welcome back to J-Flo History, the channel created to make learning AP Gov fun and simple. In today's episode, we're going to be going over Federalist number 10, one chapter to the collection of 85 essays of the Federalist Papers. Let's get started. For some quick context, we need to figure out what the Federalist Papers were in the first place. As stated earlier, they were a collection of essays, but essays about what? Well, they were essays with the goal of creating arguments to ratify the Constitution, and as you all know, the Constitution would turn the U.S. into a republic with a stronger central government, the federal government. These arguments would head straight towards the anti-federalists to try and persuade them and the American people to ratify the Constitution. Alright, now that we got that context out the way, we can head straight to Federalist number 10. Federalist 10 attempts to address the issue of faction. And for those of you that don't know what a faction is, it's simply a group united under a similar interest or interests. To make this simpler, I like to use a school analogy. If you ever walk into a school cafeteria, you'll notice that people who share certain interests tend to group together. No surprise there. Each of these groups could be considered a faction. But the thing about factions at a political level is that each group wants to gain power and push their cause, to push their influence. When the faction is in the minority, there really isn't too many worries about them pushing their influence to the extreme. However, when the faction is in the majority, that is when it becomes a problem. Let me show you all how that looks visually. When the faction is in the minority, they can try to exert their influence over the majority, but the majority will mitigate their power and influence. Now, some of you might be asking, even if the faction is in the majority, what would be the problem with that? Majority rule is good, isn't it? That is true sometimes, but not always. When the majority threatens the rights of the minority, that's when we begin to see a problem. Think of it this way. If two wolves and a sheep had a pure majority rule system and they had to decide what was for dinner, majority rule wouldn't seem so fair now. So if a majority faction is the problem, what's the solution? According to Federalist number 10, we have two choices. We can either remove the causes of factions entirely, or we can minimize the effects from them. Now, if we choose to remove the causes, there are two ways we can go about it. We can either destroy the liberty or freedom that gives people the ability to create faction, or we can make everyone the same, giving people the same opinions, passions, and interests. Immediately, you can already tell there's problems with that. If we were to take away our liberty to create factions, we give the government an extreme amount of control over our lives. If we try to make everyone the same, we lose what makes us human and unique. Because of this, Federalist 10 found it better that instead of removing the causes, we control the effects to this. To do this, we would need to create a large republic, where there would be so many different groups and factions that it would be almost impossible to get a majority from the diverse group. Think about it this way. Imagine there was a very charismatic politician. He could win the hearts of many, but in reality he was secretly evil and dictatorship-like. In a small republic, there isn't as many groups of people he needs to persuade, so they'll be more likely to follow his program. Now imagine the same politician trying to do this in a super diverse group filled with all types of people. He could still use the same level of charismatic talking, but not everyone will support him. Because the group is so diverse with so many different opinions, he won't be able to get complete control because there will always be a group of people against him. In essence, Federalist number 10 is arguing that faction should be made to counteract faction. However, this leads to an unintended consequence of political gridlock, which will be covered more in future videos. Finally, it's important to note that just because some of the founding fathers made this case in the Federalist Papers does not mean it holds up true 100% of the time. For instance, in U.S. history, we have seen issues where factions do occupy almost a majority, leading to a huge conflict in America. Like the Civil War, there's a big faction of anti-slavery and a big faction of pro-slavery. Also, in today's age, we can see that political ideology is forming its own faction in a way between Democrats and Republicans. Those two examples won't be tested on, but it's something to think about. In conclusion, we learned that the Federalist Papers were created to support the ratification of the Constitution. Federalist 10 was created by James Madison, and if you want to hear an audiobook reading to it, check out my video in the description below. Also, we learned that the big overarching argument is that factions are inevitable, and when they're small, there's no worries, but when they're big, there is worries. And the best way to stop it is to control its effects, and the way to do that is with the ratification of the Constitution that creates a large central government where faction counteracts faction. Alright, that was all for this episode. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, make sure to follow your dreams, stay ambitious, and peace out.